All right, now what we're going to do is flip the board over and we're going to be soldering together all of our connections on the bottom of the board. If we're to take a look at our plan for that, we can see what needs to be connected. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with this strip right here. So the parts that are coming through, I want to connect this leg to this, to this, to this. So all of these are going to be connected. If I look over on my board, I can see the legs from those coming through right here. So I got 1, 2, 3, and those 4 legs. Okay, so what that corresponds to is that those 4 legs need to be connected to one another. So how I go about doing that's somewhat up to you. I'm going to show you the one strategy which uses the legs of the parts. Okay, so what I want to do is just kind of bend these all over so that they can be soldered together. Now you could use this to your diagonal cutters to kind of move things around a little bit. You could even get a needle nose in there. Just be careful you don't actually cut unless you mean on, plan on cutting. But I'm just going to get these laid down next to each other as best I can so that they're not just crossing over to any other rows or anything. And I'm going to solder them together. So there's the one leg, the second leg, the third leg, and the fourth leg. And I think, let me just double check back here. Yeah, then we'll have to also connect it to 3, but we'll just connect those 4 up now. So it's the 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to trim it right here. So it's just going to be these that are connected to one another. Okay. All right, you want to be as neat as you can. And just try to make these follow the grid. It looks pretty good from above. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and solder that. You probably want to tape this down onto the table. Make sure your tip is clean. Okay. And I'm just going to put a little solder here. I'm just securing the legs up with the solder so that they're no longer loose. Okay, it doesn't mean I have to put solder along the whole strip. I just need to secure whatever is loose, so to speak, so that all the legs are connected and soldered. I think, yeah, looks to me like those are all soldered in there. And if it makes you feel better about it, sure, you could add a little bit more solder and beef it up, but just make sure that you have all 4 of those legs that are bundled together. All right, that looks good. Taking a look at what we want to solder together next, we're going to target this. So this entire column or row, however you want to look at it, I guess this column as we're looking at it, we're going to connect these together. Okay, and those are all going to connect up to ultimately ground, so right through here. Okay, so on our board, here we are. I already have a few of them started, but I bent these over so that I have these touching in here, but that you can see that's not going to get me all the way to this pad right here. I need to get there yet, and then also I don't have enough to get me to here, so we'll deal with that in a little bit. But first we'll just get these soldered together here so I'll have the bulk of it. Now be sure that you never solder into any of these along here, okay, or any of these along here. We're going to be putting something in there in the end, okay, so you can't cover those holes up. All right, let's just go ahead and get those then soldered. Again, I'm just doing it to make sure that the ends of the legs are tacked down to the next one, so that's good. And desoldered in. Ooh, I should have taped this down. I'm having problems. There we go. And let's see here. All right, I think. Let's see here. Oh, actually, there. You know what? I didn't bend that one down. Now I do have enough to get to right here. That's good. But I do need to solder right here yet. Okay, so now I have this leg soldered here, soldered, and now I'm going to finish this last one right to here. good. We're gonna now just get this connection done. We need to still connect up from here to here. All right, so we need to get that all the way. You have two choices. You could use some wire. There was some that was included in the kit, and I'm gonna just use a little piece of that now. But you could also use any, cut pieces of legs that you have off from other materials as well. All right, so I'm going to carefully strip with my diagonal cutters. If you have a strippers, you can use that. If you're stripping with the cutters, you just have to be really careful because you don't want to nick the wire. So you just want to grip the insulation and then kind of pull it away. Okay, so right now I'm just going to leave that little bit. And what I'll do, I'm going to stick this in just a tiny, tiny bit into that hole. It's probably not even coming out the other side if I were to take a look. So just actually barely. And then I'm just going to use that for now. And then I'm going to solder that in place. And then I think I can clip it now. Whoops. And then I'm just going to solder that wire right onto the rest of them. I really should have this taped down. I did not do that. You can see how I was having difficulty soldering it because it's moving. So, all right, now I have those connected. And we'll move on to take a look at what we have now. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to solder together here, these two. Then we're going to do these two, and these two. Okay, so we're just going to kind of keep moving to the right. So these two we'll start with first. So let's jump to where that is. Okay, so that would be located right here. Okay, so the way I want to do this, I still have my two leads coming through. I'm going to just trim one of them all the way off. And so I'm going to trim the second one down. So right there. Get rid of that. And, I might even be able to use that little clipping for something else later. So, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to clip this one just enough so that I can bend it over to the one right below it. Okay. So see how I clipped that right there? Okay. Now I want to get it bent over so that I can solder it onto the one right below it. Okay. See how I bent that over right there? Now I can solder it right there. So it'll be connected, and that should be just like right here. Okay, connecting those two together. All right, so we'll go ahead and tape it down so that you can get a good solder connection on it. Wipe it. My tip's clean. All right, and that one is done. I'm going to do the same thing for the next one. Okay, find it. I'm going to clip that second one. And then I'm going to bend that first one down after I trim it just a touch. Okay, so right here now, I'm going to bend that one down. All right, and hopefully you can see that. I bent it. Now I'm going to solder it right there. All right, two down. Let's keep going down the road. I'm going to cut this one off. This is the second one down. And then this first one, I'm going to trim it up a little high. Remember to clip off enough or just enough so that you have a piece that you can bend over. Okay. All right, so I've bent that over right there. Now I'm going to solder it right there. And last, I'm going to cut off the one. Okay. And then this one I'll trim up a little high so that I can bend it over. And then I get it bent over, and then I'm going to solder it right there. Now, if you cut it too short, you could still probably make a solder bridge between the two using solder, as long as you get those two connected. All right, that looks good. We'll move on to see what we have next. Next up, we're going to solder together these groups of two. This one, this group of two, this group of two, and then this diagonal group of two right here. And what I will do is I'm going to cut this one short, this one short, this one short, and this one short. So I'm going to cut those right off at the top. And then the ones over here on the right, I'm going to leave those longer so that I can bend those over and solder. So that's going to be the strategy. So that would be, here's the group of two, and then this group of two, this group of two, and here's the diagonal group of two. Okay, so I'm going to start by cutting this one, this one, this one, and this one, which are the ones on the left. Just be careful that you're getting the right one. Fortunately, these are still close enough where if you made a mistake, you could still probably make a little solder bridge and connect them. In fact, maybe that's what I shall do. Nah, let's stick with our plan. Okay, get the clips out of there. All right, so then I'm going to make this one cut long enough to bend over. Okay, so you can see that these two now will be connected once I solder. I'll just do that as long as I mentioned it. Okay. And then I'm going to do that for the remaining ones as well. Bend it over, cut it. And see this one. Oh, that nicked, it broke off. Well, let's try a bridge. So as long as I can get these two to connect, put in some solder. Yeah, that worked just fine. So no problem there. And then diagonally for the last one. And you can see diagonally like that. Throw in some solder. All right, and that should be good. We're going to solder together another series of two groups of two. So I'm going to do these two, these two, these two, and then these two, which are diagonal. I'm going to do the same method. I'm going to trim this one, this one, this one, and this one short, and then I'm going to clip these a little bit longer so that I can bend them over and solder. Okay. So first we'll trim those short. I'm going to tape this down. All right, so make sure you're clipping the right ones. This one, this one, go right down the column there. All right, and then we're going to cut this one so that I can bend it over a little bit. Snip. All right, I'll come back and solder that. Bend this one over. Snip. Then that one. And then this one's diagonal. All right, let's solder those up. Make sure you have your tip clean. Just make sure that you are actually heating both of the parts up so solder is sticking to both of them. All right, and let's then see what we have to finish. Now what we're going to do is we're going to solder together this column right here. It's the last of what we'll have to do for columns before we do the jumper wires. So these are going to be all bent so that they're all in a nice row. Now, if you want, you could trim this, to just the right length if you wanted to. So like you can see where I trim that so it just kind of meets that next one. And that's fine if you want to do that. That'll just reduce the amount of material that's on the board, that's all. Of course, you could just do it like we did when we very first started, which was just kind of solder them all together, but I'm going to do it a little different way. Okay, so there they all are. They're still all in a nice row. Now just make sure when we're doing this that all the solder stays right through here. We don't want any solder jumping over to any other pads to the left here. Okay, and solder. Okay, and that looks good. So these are all connected right now. So now all we have left is jumpers. So let's take a look at those. We're going to do this jumper right now. So this, we're going to have wire going from here, which is where it says on the other side of the board, it should say 5 volts, and the other end will then connect up to that same row that we just did. Okay, so let's jump to our project. Now we got to make dang sure that we get this wire in the right spots. Okay, so let's I'm going to strip a little bit off the end. Got to be careful when you're stripping so you don't nick the wire. If you nick the wire, if it bends a few times, it'll break on you, and you don't want that. Okay, so what we're looking for is this hole right here. This is where it says 5 volts. If we were to stick that through so you can see where it is right here on this side. Okay, let me wiggle it. See it? Okay, so that's where we need to stick the wire. That's where it needs to solder. Right, so take one end, and I'm just going to stick enough through so that I can still solder it, just about like that, because we don't want too much of this bare long leg exposed. That looks like it should be just about enough. And then we'll add some solder in there. All right, and then that end just needs to come around and reach right up to this row. Right. So what I can do is I can just trim this, and then you can carefully strip some wire off of it. And I'm going to just bend this a little bit, and I'm going to solder it right onto there. If you need to use a little piece of tape or something to hold it so it doesn't move on you, that helps. Okay, one jumper down, 2 to go. Let's take a look at what's next. This jumper from here to right here. Now this happens to be one end of the switch, so from here to here. Use the same method. We're going to take a little bit of wire and strip the end. There we go. And I need to connect this one to right there. Okay. So just, there is nothing in this hole next to it, so don't worry too much if you get a little there. I'm going to actually trim this end up just a little more, so it's pretty short. You can see that. Right now I want one end to go right there, so you're going to probably need to use a piece of tape or something so that you can hold it to keep it right next to where I need to solder it. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some solder. All right, good deal. And then the other end, that's going to come up here and connect to this column right here. So I can probably cut it right about here and then just strip some wire off of that. And this is where I want it to go. All right, it looks like it's staying pretty good, so I will just go ahead and solder it right there. Okay. All right, then that one's done. One last jumper then, which would be right here. We're going from 3 down to this column right here. So I'll start by putting it into that 3. So if I look on this side of the board and get my piece of scrap wire ready, You can see here's the 3. This is the 3 hole that I want. If I stick my wire through, you can kind of see where that is right there. Oops, let me orient the board better. Right there, right there. See it? All right, so now let's just take a look back here. So that's this hole right here. Okay, so pay close attention to make sure that you get the right hole. As you're looking at it from the bottom, which is where we're going to do our soldering, it should be the 4th one from the right. If I were counting over from here, the 4th hole over. If I just double check, I can see that, yep, it's coming through that 3, right where I need it to. Okay. All right, so I'm going to tape my board down. I think I'm also going to need to use a little piece of tape here to help hold my wire. Then I can get in there right here and solder. Okay. And then the other end is going to need to come over and connect up to this column right here. So I will trim that wire a little and strip it a little bit off of it. And that looks good. And then just solder it right onto the rest of them. You might need to use tape to hold it down so that it gets soldered to the rest of them. All right, that looks good. Okay. So now we're on to, I think we have one last connection we need to make. Let's take a look. We do, right here. Right here. So from the middle of that switch to 7. So let's look where that is. I might have to move this one just a tad. Okay, so here's the switch, right? So the middle leg is the one that's going to connect up to 7 right here. So we need to complete this connection right here. Okay, so that is right here. And this is what the solder bridge looks like after we've completed that connection right here. So make sure it's the ones that you bridge are in line with this one pin. Just make sure you're accurate, and that's these right here. And if you can't get it to bridge with solder, you could always, use another method like we did with some of these, where we just took a little piece of wire and laid it on there. So if you need to do that, you can do that as well. All right, looking at our board now, what we're going to need to do is we need to install some pins so that we're able to actually take this board and plug it into our Arduino board. Okay. So these are the pins or connectors that came with this board. Okay. These are probably not the ones that I wanted to get you. I wanted to get you some other parts that had some, well, they're just pins coming through. But this is what we have. It'll work and it'll be fine. But you'll notice that they're all 4 different sizes. And so what you're going to need to do is find the correct size to figure out where it needs to go as far as the board is. So here's the biggest one. It goes in right here. Okay. Then this one looks like that one will work for there. This one will work here. And then this one will fit in right there. Okay, so they all should fit perfectly, and then they should all go down right onto the top of the board. When you flip it over, just hang on to the legs of the board. We want this to sit nice on the table so that these are coming straight up. Okay, if you do that, then basically these black things, they're going to be sitting right face down on the tabletop, and the pins should come straight up. Very important, because if they're not lined up, if they're not coming straight up, it might be hard to plug it into this board. So the way I would have you do it is to just solder in a couple of these to start with, just one leg from each of those connectors. And you might need to hold the board down. I highly recommend that you do. Make sure that those are staying straight up and down. And then I'm just going to solder one of the connections to somewhere in the middle of this first connector, and then I'll do the same for some of these other connectors. Be careful you don't actually accidentally cross the solder between the pins. Don't make a bridge, because if you make a bridge, you're going to have to fix it. You can't have solder jumping between any of these pads. Okay. So I'm just soldering one of the pins on each of these connectors for now. And the only reason I'm doing that is so that I can take it off and I can see that these are nice and flat on there. And also, if I were to want to plug it into my board, I can see that these would line up okay. But don't actually plug it in. Remember, you only have one pin in there right now. But I can see that I'd be able to, without too much of a difficulty, get those into the sockets. So I'm going to keep moving forward with soldering the rest of them in. And this would then finish everything up. Just be really careful that you don't make bridges. If you make a bridge, try to move your iron in between it to eliminate any bridges if you do make one. Remember, bridges would be as if you accidentally got solder to go from one pad to the one next to it. Might need to periodically wipe off your tip. And last, what you also want to check is your LEDs. What we don't want is see this leg on this LED, all the legs that are attached through right here, make sure that they are not touching the pad that's forward of it. So you can see, like, this pad, it's coming up. You don't want it to accidentally touch that pad down in there. What you could do, you could always put like a little piece of tape or nail polish to cover that up. But if you just kind of position these carefully so that the legs are bent up so that they don't touch that pad there, you should be okay. All right, now the next step will be to test this.